Building of Four Corners, Part 2, the display model's bank building. In Part 1 of this series, we saw and heard how the small-scale planning model was designed and built. We will now examine the steps in the design and construction of the bank building for the larger-scale display model. In the designer's preliminary sketch, the bank was conceived as a building with arches along Main Street. The stairway led from the Main Street sidewalk to the elevated main entrance in the central arch. The small-scale planning model of the bank was constructed according to this design. When it came time to plan the design of the large-scale bank model, an important design consideration occurred to the designer. If a bank in the real world were built according to the planning model, bank customers entering the Main Street entrance would need to ascend a long flight of stairs. In the planning model, no accessibility ramp was provided on Main Street for handicapped customers. Keeping this fact in mind, the designer drew up a set of working drawings for the large-scale model that eliminated the Main Street stairs. In the new design, the Main Street entrance was placed at sidewalk level, eliminating the requirement for stairs and ramps. The design for the bank's gabled roof was developed in two stages, with the roof in the second stage standing upon a row of dentils. The dentils are carried around the corner to the side elevations of the bank. In the working drawings, some of the bank windows are surmounted by arches. This conception was dropped in the display model. The base for the Four Corners display model is a 20-inch by 30-inch piece of foam board. Foam board, which is made from polystyrene foam laminated on both sides by colored art paper, is commonly available for sale in stationery and art stores. The foam board base for the display model is laminated on both sides with white paper. The foam board base for the display model possesses the same proportions as the boxboard base for the planning model, 3 units long by 2 units wide. The length is 1.5 times the width. The designer anticipated that a standard 20-inch by 30-inch foam board base would be used for the display model. This is why the small-scale boxboard base for the planning model was cut to the same proportions as the display model's base, 5 inches by 7.5 inches. In this view, we see that the small baseboard of the planning model possesses the same proportions as the large base of the display model. The fact that the length of the baseboard is greater than the width gives rise to certain design decisions about the buildings that will stand upon the building sites. The designer noted when researching the dimensions of buildings that face on actual downtown main streets that the width of the facades along the main street was exceeded by the depth of the building sites. A downtown bank building, for example, might possess a Main Street facade of 50 feet, but the depth of the building perpendicular to Main Street would be greater than 50 feet. Since Main Street in the Four Corners model runs along the greater 30-inch length of the baseboard, the Main Street building sides are wider than their depth. Thus, the back of a building facing Main Street would extend beyond the edge of the baseboard. This means that the bank building will not be a complete model of a bank. The bank of the building is cut off at the edge of the baseboard. This is why the working drawing of the bank's Maple Street facade, which is perpendicular to Main Street, shows only that part of the building that extends to the edge of the baseboard. In order to provide strength and rigidity to the bank model, a sturdy frame is erected upon the display model's building site. The frame is made from 3/8-inch basswood strips cut to the length dictated by the working drawing and cemented to each other with a reliable adhesive. The facade of the bank building is made from a piece of artist matting board. Window and door openings are cut from the facade in accordance with the working drawing. Last-minute design decisions regarding the placement of window and door openings result in the fact that the facade does not look exactly like the working drawing. After the window openings were cut into the facade, window frame detail cut from boxboard and painted with flat white acrylic paint was cemented into and around the openings. Simulated glass now needed to be placed into the window frames. For glazing material, the designer selected transparent sheet plastic, such as the clear, colorless sheets available as page protectors at stationery stores. The bank's windows were designed as small panes separated from each other by vertical and horizontal strips known as muntins. Because the display model of the bank is built to a scale where every foot of length is represented by only about 1/8 of an inch, the designer decided to make the muntins by slicing very thin strips of adhesive label paper and applying the strips directly to the transparent plastic glazing of the windows. To ensure uniformity of placement, the plastic glazing was temporarily taped upon a copy of the working drawing, and the muntin strips were applied directly over the muntin lines of the drawing. The completed glazing was then trimmed as necessary and cemented to the insides of the window frames. After the glazing was completed, imitation brick was cemented onto the facade around the window frames. The brick pattern was drawn on a computer screen and printed upon colored paper with the computer printer. The designer selected yellow paper for the brickwork, thereby simulating yellow brick. 2 signboards were made from boxboard, painted with flat white acrylic paint, and cemented upon the facade. Finally, the entire facade was cemented onto the basswood framework of the bank building. The doorway to the bank's facade was also made from transparent plastic, simulating a plate glass door. The semicircular window was placed on top of the door frame. The curved framework of the semicircular window was not made from adhesive paper. Instead, a length of thin wire from a twist tie was formed into a semicircle and painted with flat white acrylic paint. The radiating strips around the curved wire were, however, made from short strips of adhesive paper. Here we see the doorway detail in a later stage of completion. Although the Four Corners model is an exterior model displaying the outward appearances of buildings, the ground floor of the bank was detailed with office spaces, a vault door, and a customer service lobby. These details would be visible in the finished model only if interior illumination was later retrofitted into the model. After the ground floor was outfitted with interior details, an interior upper floor was added, and then construction began upon the roof in accordance with the working drawings. Before the roof was added, a row of dentils needed to be inserted above the top floor. The dentils are small rectangular structures, and the designer first attempted to cut them from narrow wooden strips. This method of making dentils in 1/87th scale soon proved to be unsatisfactory, and the designer then decided to create each dentil from carefully measured paper, cut and cemented into uniform shapes. The paper dentils were then individually cemented into position, following the spacing dictated by the working drawings. The dentils were added to 3 sides of the bank model, with the back side opposite Main Street being left entirely unfinished, since that side coincided with the edge of the baseboard, effectively truncating the model. A gabled roof with an ornate pediment was then constructed above the row of dentils. The bank did not fill the entire building site along Main Street, and the designer decided to construct a public park in the unoccupied area. The park is bordered with a low yellow brick wall and paved with red brick. Here we see an advanced stage of construction of the bank model. The designer noted that the rooftops of commercial buildings often are outfitted with sheet metal air conditioning units, and thus decided to place 2 such units atop the bank building. In this view, we see one of the units on the near side of the roof, and the second matching unit being installed on the far slope, with part of the second unit lying upon the sidewalk along Main Street, awaiting installation. For additional information about the Four Corners model, visit www.kaiserkill.com and click the link to Design Unit.